I am
Okay.
Win Miller. I'm in charge of this room, I guess, and I'm just supposed to introduce Roberta Hill. Is there anybody here that doesn't know Roberta Hill?
I can introduce myself too. So I'll say a little bit about the organization.
Okay. Roberta is, everybody knows she's the top person on any kind of plants, aquatic plants in the state. So she is the charged person for that.
Thank you, Win. Okay, I'm going to start my time. Oops. No, hang on.
Is this right?
No, I'm not starting yet. I guess this is what I want. Okay. So, hi everyone. We'll keep this very casual. I'm actually, I'm not supposed to move too much. I'm actually thinking that the approach to this presentation is going to be that I'm going to kind of open up the discussion, and then I'm hoping that we'll have some questions, some stories to relate from your own lakes, and then some discussion about that. So my name again is Roberta Hill, and I am with the Lake Stewards of Maine. For those of you who don't know me, you might not know the organization, and you might not know that name for the organization, because since 1971, we've been the Maine Volunteer Lake Monitoring Program, and just recently changed our name to Lake Stewards of Maine, and I will actually say a few words about that later. We have a mission that is not unique in some ways. Most of you, if you have a lake association or belong to another organization and you're here today, you have a similar mission, and that's to protect Maine lakes. But we do it in such a way that we believe helps to strengthen the mission of all of your organizations. We work to engage citizens in the task of collecting credible scientific information about Maine lakes. We are the oldest and one of the largest citizen lake monitoring programs in the nation, and Maine can be very, very proud of that fact. Maine was way out in the forefront shortly after the Clean Water Act was adopted with developing this program of engaging volunteers. We as an organization provide training and technical support to thousands of individuals and agency people, educators, and more across the state. And we currently have 1,300 or roughly 1,300 active certified lake monitors, people either monitoring water quality or invasive plants primarily. And we are the largest, by far the largest collector of scientific information pertaining to Maine lakes, at least on the broadest scale in Maine. Maggie asked me 2 years ago to do this talk, and I got sick, so I wasn't able to make the conference, so I'm doing it now. But basically she asked me to come and to speak to you about, we work with a lot of volunteers, and to speak to you about what it means to be a volunteer, also how to attract volunteers, engage volunteers, and to sustain your volunteer base. So that is what I'm planning to do. I call the talk The Ripple Effect, how volunteerism can save our lakes. And I want to start, this is not going to be a technical talk in any way, and unlike previous talks that we've heard today, there's not going to be a lot of bad news. There's not going to be a lot of, these are all the challenges. If we want to talk about challenges afterward, we can certainly do that. But I just have nothing but positive things to say about volunteerism. So I just want to start with grounding in what it means to be a volunteer, the importance of volunteerism, and so I thought I would go to those wiser than myself, and I started with Mother Teresa. And by saying I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples. She gave me actually the theme of my talk. She's saying a couple of things there. One, that volunteerism is an individual act that has the aim of creating change beyond oneself, to make the world a better place, to make a piece of the world a better place. The other thing that she points out is that once you cast the stone in the water, the ripples go, and you don't know where they're going to interconnect with something else, and where that's going to make a difference, and when it's going to make a difference. So that's a cool thing about volunteerism. It's it goes out into the world, and we can't even possibly know how many people it's going to touch along the way. And then this is an unknown author, but still I think this points out another really important thing. Volunteering is the ultimate exercise in democracy. You vote in elections once a year, but when you volunteer, you vote every day about the kind of community you want to live in. And this points out that volunteerism is also a deeply social act, and it's an individual act, but it's a deeply social act. It's a community building act. And then the last one, the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit, points to the fact that volunteerism is ultimately a selfless act. It's a generous act. It's a forward-thinking act. So, pardon? We have a problem. What is the problem? I'm sorry.
He's got it. You can hear the people.
The mic is. Their mic is coming through here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll stop.
She's gonna.
I think they caught on.
Yeah.
It's coming through the water sprinkler system?
No, the speakers are up there.
Okay. Do you think they got it?
Off he goes.
Should I keep going?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to take that foundation and then look at our volunteers. They don't represent all volunteers, but they do represent a pretty wide cross-section of people who care about lakes. So we're going to look at the qualities that individuals who volunteer for a lake organization bring to the table. This is the way we're going to get at how to engage them and how to maintain them. Let their gifts, I guess you could put it, be the guiding principle in the way you set up your volunteer program. So I'll just start first by just telling you what our volunteers do. This is just to kind of let you know the kind of work they do. They measure water quality, watershed health and function. We screen for aquatic plants. That's my role at the organization. I'm the director of our invasive species program. We also, along the way, because we're out there looking very carefully at lakes and their plants, inventory the native plants, and we're collecting a lot of incredibly good data that had not been collected before on our native ecosystems, including the aquatic plants. We help track the effects of climate change. We assist in special research projects. And increasingly, our volunteers are playing leadership roles on conservation efforts on their own lakes, and also in their communities, and also within our organization. So that's basically what our volunteers do. When asked why they do what they do, and I'll just start with this one. Across the board, we did actually some focus groups and some surveys just recently. It's ongoing research that's being done by the University of Maine and Firuza Pavri at University of Southern Maine. Basically, she's the social scientist who's guided this part of the work to determine how vulnerable our lakes are, and to update that information about the vulnerability of lakes, taking into account the stewardship piece. Across the board, our volunteers identify as not so much as monitors, that though they recognize that term, but as stewards. It's a much broader term. They're stewards of their lakes. And so that is actually one of the reasons we changed our name. One, our name was kind of long and hard to remember, and it was never right when we were being introduced. People would always say the people who volunteer, the monitor, and that was always kind of messed up. But Lake Stewards of Maine, it's very straightforward. It's who we are, and it's how our volunteers identify. There's clearly, this is a huge guiding reason that people come to this kind of work, this love of and concern for lakes, and so that's no surprise. But this is Dennis Robert. He's one of our invasive plant patrollers. He lives on Mousom Lake. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that lake, but Mousom Lake has it's a flooded river valley and has a very, very extensive shoreline and lots of littoral habitat where plants grow, and it's a big lake, and it's a popular lake. And he basically surveyed the entirety of it snorkeling like this with his camera, towing a 16-foot boat behind him for safety purposes. And so that's the kind of love and concern that people are bringing. It's kind of an extraordinary case, but he does exemplify that passion. And so speaking of that, the passion and energy, and that's what we see in our volunteers again and again. They care about what they're doing, they have tremendous vibrancy, and we were talking about bringing in youth to the work, and that's very, very important. We need to kind of keep passing this work on to future generations, there's no question. But we primarily work with a demographic of people that we think is extraordinary, and that is people who often come and have time at the end of their careers or after they've retired from their careers where they have time to devote to something they truly love. And you just can't beat that kind of passion, energy, and they bring other things as well. So we love our demographic, and the good news is that people continue to retire, no matter how old they are. So there's always a new batch coming in, and there's also, we've noticed, and it's true across the board, this kind of can-do, will-do spirit, not waiting for others to do the work, and or as Peter Lowell was saying this morning, basically assuming, well, it's probably being done by somebody else, or the state's going to take care of it, or it'll be sorted out. These are people who just step up and say, this is not being done, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to encourage others to do it as well. An ongoing love of learning, and so people who will come with a lifetime of expertise may not know very much at all about aquatic plants, for example, and you can just see when the light bulbs start going off and people just start really, they've learned one plant, well, what's that plant? And then they want to learn the next plant, and so on. So it's just this continuous process. There's always more to learn. And as I just mentioned, people come to this work with already a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, a lot of creativity that then they bring to the task at hand. So this is an example of a group of volunteers. Keith Williams, there's Dennis again, and this is Pixie Williams. And we had been for years doing pressed herbarium specimens, and you're all probably familiar with the concept here. You're basically trying to capture the essence of a plant so that it can be used for, one, to make a record of what was found in that location at that point in time, but also to record the features that can be used for identification, some of which might be even the flowers. You try to capture the plant in its full mature form and then present it on a piece of paper so you can really see those features and you could actually look at them under a microscope and so on. So we'd been doing this in kind of a haphazard way. When we had some good specimens, we would press them. They ended up often living in the plant press for way longer than they should have. We're very busy. We have a very small staff. And Pixie and Dennis and Keith decided this is not how you create an herbarium. So Pixie in particular, who has a degree in plant systematics and has worked developing herbaria elsewhere, not just aquatic plant herbaria, she kind of led the quality assurance part of the team. Keith is an avid collector of plants. His goal is to collect one of each species on every lake that he can possibly visit over the course of the rest of his life. And Dennis, who is a master at doing the pressings. They're works of art. They're just not just very, very good from a teaching point of view and vouchering point of view, but they're works of art. So they have taken over that project. We've let them go at it, and now we have what we call the Pixie Williams herbarium, and it's the first herbarium in Maine, and maybe even in New England, I don't know, I haven't checked, that focuses discreetly on hydric plants, aquatic plants, wetland plants. So it's growing, and we're really excited about that project. That's their project. We help in every way we can, but they're leading that project. An eagerness to share, teach, and pass on this expertise that they have to others. So these are just examples, and I won't go into detail on these pictures. Ross Westcott is in the upper left, and he is the master of the hands-free view scope, the trunk scope, and the smaller kayak scope, where you can basically just put them in the water beside your boat and then look down in the large viewing area and see what's growing, even when there's a riffle on the surface of the water. And so he not only created them, designed them, figured out how to make them out of practical materials, but then he teaches others how to make them as well. And then, there's no question about this, is that they're very fond of working with other people and having fun. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind also, as somebody who's trying to bring volunteers to your program. There's also just we're finding a deep commitment to this work and some incredible longevity. So now we have, this actually slide, we first created it several years ago, but we have now a number of water quality monitors. We've been doing water quality monitoring longer than invasive plants monitoring, that have been with the program continuously every summer, taking their Secchi disc readings and sometimes oxygen readings and else for over 40 years now. So that's an amazing commitment to this work. The national average of how long a person stays with a volunteer effort is 5 years. So that just kind of tells you something too. We must be doing something right, but it also basically, we can't take credit for the fact that people just care about what they're doing and they want to continue doing it. These volunteers are natural leaders, and if they don't think of themselves initially as natural leaders, through continuous training, support, networking with others, encouragement across the board, they become leaders in their communities. And if they really still don't want to be the ones stepping forward, they're definitely collaborators. These are two qualities that they all bring. Importantly, now in this day and age, these are people who value science, who understand that good science, is absolutely necessary to good decision making. And so they want to be a part of that. They want to be a part of gathering this information. This is one of our water quality monitors, Dan Garrett, and he's working with Casey Fitzgibbon at UMO. This was also part of that vulnerability study work that we're collaborating with the university to conduct. So those are qualities. So now to kind of take all of that and say, well, what are the best tips for engaging people? This is just in some ways going to be a reflection of what you've already seen. Try to utilize and value and appreciate and celebrate those qualities and build that into your program. So first of all, this is kind of a model that's been used many times, showing how there's this hierarchy of people moving from not being aware of an issue at all, not being aware that, if they try to rake their forest, that might have an impact on the lake, all the way to being ready to take action. And so there's different ways that you can reach out to people at various places on this hierarchy. And what you're trying to do is establish a connection through these forms of outreach. And you can read this, and that's kind of out there everywhere, and we can talk more about it if you want. But I wanted to focus on how you're making the connection. And how you're making the connection is through finding shared passions, concerns, hopes, goals, values, interests. That's how you connect with people. And they might not be, having a wild landscape or, a very untouched buffer. That might not be the first thing that is your shared passion. But that is, you find that way of making that connection on one of those levels. And then you provide an easy point of entry. And because people are all different and people connect in many, many different ways, you want to have lots of points of entry. So it might be a display at your annual meeting with some brochures and some literature for people to take away. You might do a more interactive, hands-on kind of display where you're actually getting people to learn something and take something away with them that they've now learned and they can share with others. This is an image of one of our plant paddles where we meet on the shore and we talk about the threat of invasive species, and then we go out on the water and people learn, they kind of get a flavor for what it would mean to be an early detector, to how is the survey done, what are the tools that we use, and that kind of thing. Just get a flavor of it. And then we go back to shore, we do a sorting exercise where they can sort plants that they've collected out there in the water, and they can determine whether they found anything suspicious or not. And then we actually even go through identifying for those who want to learn the actual plants that we did pull out of the lake and identify the native plants, which is actually a very good way to be on the alert for invasive plants. If you know the native plants that belong in your lake and you're familiar with them, that all becomes a very familiar backdrop on which anything new that you don't recognize is going to pop out as being something to catch your attention and to make you take a closer look. So there's all different ways to provide people just an easy point of entry into the program that you're asking them to become involved in. And then I really recommend that you create engagement experiences that are fun and perhaps even a bit challenging. We did a plant paddle up on Portage Lake in Aroostook County. It was pouring rain, and generally if it's pouring rain we will cancel a workshop, but we had a 2-day trip. We did the one workshop the first day, and this was the second day. We were there, they were there, and everyone just decided we still want to go. So we all got our rain gear on, and this is like a little lull in the rain because I noticed that Colleen is not wearing her raincoat. But it was a happy travel, and so there was this kind of shared sense of, we're doing something kind of challenging today. These are not the best conditions. So it should be memorable and satisfying. And the sky's the limit on this, depending on your program, and we can talk specifics when we get to the discussion part. But these are my ideas here, that you want to really find something that helps hook people into the work, and they find their own way of hooking in. I think these are going to go backwards. So, maybe I forgot to, all right, so sorry, I have a little problem there, but we'll just continue. Oops. So foster ongoing engagement and experiential learning that's incremental and well supported at every step. So for us, we have this awareness raising part, and that might be an outreach at an event or something like that, a table. And then we try to organize plant paddles. That's again experiential engagement. And then we offer advanced trainings for people who, hey, this is pretty interesting, I'd like to learn more, I'd like to get into this a little more seriously. We offer a spectrum of advanced trainings as well. And then we actually help to organize, our volunteers do a great deal of the organization as well, team missions. We have done missions to survey lakes that have just recently, a invasive plant has just recently been found in one location, and now we don't know how far has that plant spread in the lake. So we have a group of people, we call them our IPP rapid responders, who have agreed to organize and deploy as quickly as possible to determine the extent of that spread. We have what we call an IPP Jumpstart program, where we go to areas of the state where the lakes are of very high value, but they're very under-monitored, and we try to jumpstart citizen-based monitoring in those areas by basically providing some engagement training, like plant paddles, and then conducting the survey, inviting the novices from the area to come along. Those are really, really fun. I don't know if any of you have participated in one of those. I don't see any of we call them our Uber-Ippers, these people who are willing to travel. And then we provide a lot of leadership support as well, and occasions for our leaders to come together and share challenges and ideas and success stories and so on. So the cross-pollination just gets really lively. And then what happens is people start just going off on their own. Our challenge, I was asked to talk about challenges, and this is going to be the only challenge I'm going to talk about, is keeping up with our volunteers, and so that we can support them in the very best way we can. Resources are always part of the issue, but basically just keeping up with that energy and that passion. And we have an example of the volunteer-led initiative would be the Pixie Williams Herbarium. So that's engagement. Growth and sustainability, these are just some ideas, is to find roles to suit the volunteer's interests. Don't try to fit a person to a preconceived role. Really spend some time with your newly engaged volunteer right up front, exploring what it is they're interested in, what skills they bring to the table, what they're passionate about, and then try to find the appropriate role. That would be a recommendation. This as an educator, this is my philosophy of education. Like, you could just put it right in that one statement probably. If you just provide a safe and welcoming place for participants to explore, wonder, be a beginner, grow, innovate, and thrive, then as an educator, you can kind of just step back and help whenever a helping hand is needed. But this is how people naturally grow and gain new information, and if you support that, that will happen. And that brings us to provide support and encouragement. And we have all kinds of ways of supporting people through our trainings, through the materials that we create, through our website, through technical assistance calls and emails, to providing plant identification, a service where we'll identify plants. Wynn gets something the CBI brings to him, and he takes a picture of it and sends it in, and within usually a short period of time we can get back to him with an identification of the plant. So those kinds of things, just provide enough support so people feel like you've got their back. This one is maintain high standards. We've been told over the years, because we do have really high quality assurance standards, especially for the water quality monitoring, where that data, if it's not collected properly, it's of no value. So we don't want anybody wasting their time, and we certainly can't stand behind data that isn't collected correctly. So we have a very tough quality assurance protocol for that. Not so much on the plant side, because if you know some basic things about what makes a plant, what features are suspicious, even if you know very little else, you could be a very effective early detector. Could you be more effective if you knew more? Absolutely. But still, even with a small amount of information. However, we maintain really high standards, and we've been told over the years, that's kind of going to reduce the number of people who are willing to get involved if you ask too much of them. Ask them to come to a training, ask them to be recertified, once every so many years. And but we have found the opposite true. If people are going to commit their time to an enterprise, they want to feel like they're giving valuable time to that enterprise, and they want to know that the time they've given is highly valued. The work that our volunteers do is used by researchers, by the state agency, state agency, but also the federal government. It's used by municipalities, lake associations, and others. It's highly valued, and so people don't mind that you ask them to do something at a high standard. Appreciate contributions to the cause, no matter how great or small. This is me giving an award to Dennis, and he's received several because he just keeps astounding us with his work. But there are many, many volunteers who contribute on a much smaller basis, and we do our very, very best to recognize everybody at every opportunity that we have to do so, because we know how valuable people's time is. This is important, and if anything, this is one of my challenges, is because we get so busy in the summertime. I'm not always able to communicate as quickly as I'd like to, but I do my best to communicate as quickly as I can, and communication is key. So you're not only communicating with people, being there for them, providing their technical assistance and support, but welcoming communication, and especially welcome constructive criticism. There's no way to get better at what you do if people don't know that they can give you suggestions for how you could do better. So we ask for it, we beg for it, we utilize it. The field guide, which I didn't bring one in, I don't know if any of you have seen the new field guide, that is the evolution of feedback that we've received from people who've been using the various editions of that in the field. We could use much better images. We could use a little more detailed information. We could use a table comparing the characteristics of all the milfoils and so on. All those ideas came from feedback. So welcome it. It's really your best way to grow. And then finally on these suggestions is to continually assess, evaluate, and adjust course. And I guess I just talked about that. Really, it's like you're in a sailboat with a light wind, and you've got to read the wind and read the boat and read the water and constantly just be making little tweaks and sometimes big tweaks to keep yourself on course. And that is, so be flexible in that way would be another recommendation. This is the way we've built those recommendations into our program. We now have a really vibrant multi-level system with volunteer leaders playing very critical roles at every level of this. Who in this room is a lake team leader for invasive plant patrol? Is anybody? Okay, so we've got a couple. That's great. And how about a regional coordinator? Maybe. No, we're not pressuring you. Okay. So at every level, we now have this really pretty active leadership training and support, and we have an increased emphasis on teamwork across the board. Not only at the lake level, at the regional level, but at the organizational level. And we encourage and participate the widest possible participation. So we see everybody, including ourselves. We don't really separate ourselves out from our volunteers too much. We are working as a team, but we work on a continuum. And we start at one point on the continuum, and we just keep going on along. And so our goal is, and I think this is a good goal for anyone working with volunteers, is to make sure that everybody participates, no matter where they are on the continuum, feels comfortable with the work, enjoys the work, sees their experience as an ongoing opportunity for learning and enrichment, gains new skills, understanding, and confidence over time, and feels that they are accomplishing something meaningful and of value. And through this formula, we are building a tremendous sense of community within our organization and with the communities that are now represented by our volunteers. We're making new connections in their communities, so our community is growing. We're gaining new knowledge, new understanding through all of this incredible feedback loop. We're gaining new abilities, and we certainly have expanded our capacity. I mentioned earlier, resources are always an issue for a nonprofit organization. Having the leadership piece, having our volunteers play so many important roles in the organization have tremendously expanded our capacity as an organization. We believe it expands the capacities of the communities that are served by these volunteers. We're all uplifted every day. We love going to work. Our job is to serve the volunteers. That leaves us uplifted, encouraged, inspired, really inspired. And, as I started off with the title of my talk, we are saving lakes. We're saving our beautiful, clearest, cleanest lakes maybe in all the world, lakes that we have here in Maine. The number of lakes in Maine, by the way, I should just say, this number has been recently updated by the use of GIS and satellite technology. There are actually 33,000 lakes and ponds, or bodies, like sometimes they're very small bodies of water in the state of Maine. 33,000. 6,000 of those have been given a Midas number, and about 2,700 of those are in the public domain. They're lakes over 10 acres in size. But 33, any of those lakes could become infested with invasive plants, for example, and would become then a threat to the rest of our state. So we have some of the clearest, cleanest lakes, and we have an abundant number of lakes in Maine. And they really are extraordinary. And we want to keep them that way, and with volunteers, we are keeping them that way. So that's the end of that part of the talk, and that's my contact information. If you want to reach out to me for any reason, I also have cards, and maybe I'll just leave a few here so you can pick them up at the end. But anyway, so I thought in our time, because we did start late, but don't I have like maybe 5 or so more minutes?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, go on.
So so I'm just opening this up. This is discussion to stories that you have about volunteers in your community, any challenges that you've had, questions that you have for me or for the group, and let's just do it.
This isn't quite one of those categories, but is the Pixie Williams herbarium something that is available online?
Not, well, it will be. We're scanning all the herbaria sheets as we do them, and we haven't got them online yet, but they will be online. And we're actually we're part of a region-wide herbarium system, so they'll be accessible online through this herbaria system from anybody in Connecticut or anywhere. So we're heading in that direction, but for now you have to come visit it. Yes?
You talked about some principles in general, but do you have some specific things you do for succession planning, aside from counting on there's more people retiring all the time, in terms of replacing people that leave?
Well, more people are retiring all the time.
Yeah.
No, honestly, we don't really work on succession planning because for example, and I guess I would say that water quality monitors are a bit harder to replace than invasive plant patrollers. For the reason I pointed out earlier, in that you get two highly trained water quality monitors. You usually don't want more than 2 or 3 if there's only one deep station. If you have multiple deep stations, you'd want more. But because you want the data to be consistent, you want just a few number of people who are doing it in a very consistent way. So those people, they actually often find their replacement. People who have already been going out and assisting them, it's an almost natural process where they're now in their community looking for their replacement. So we rarely we do no recruiting of volunteers, 0. I just would say that right up front. We don't. We put the word out there when we're doing a workshop and all that stuff. We advertise that, but we don't ever recruit. Say we need people on this. We're going to recruit them. We actually work with the volunteers that we do have, and as I said, in the cases where we have no volunteers, we try to bring a volunteer spirit to that community and interface with the community and help them to find some people within the community that will volunteer, and then we'll work with them. So, but again, so much of the recruitment is done by our volunteers, the people who are actually on the ground. And that's kind of the beauty of the system in many ways, is that, again, with a very small staff, we have, hundreds of trained volunteers that are out there in their communities looking for people to help. On the plant patrol side, we try to build teams, and with teams you have that kind of resilience where, let's say what lake are you on?
Coldstream Pond,
The Coldstream Pond in the Bridgeton area?
the one in
Is it
Lincoln
Sligo?
area, no, it's
Okay.
north of Bangor a little bit.
Okay, yep. And so if you were to take Coldstream Pond and divide the shoreline up into, say, 1,000-foot sectors, that's how we would usually create a team. And then you try to get people in your community to take on a sector. If over a period of time, as people age out, as it was being discussed earlier, using the term age out, that team has the ability to recruit new people to adopt that sector. I don't know, I guess I don't have any specifics other than that. Does anybody else have specifics? Win?
As far as the succession planning, that'll be covered a little bit in my presentation that follows. We changed president of our Lake Association 3 years ago, and in the process of doing that, we developed a plan for training the new president, if you will, coming up with a committee structure, coming up with a timeline for when things had to be done, and all that put together in the way of creating a succession planning format, at least,
Right.
so you'd have the wherewithal to do it.
Yeah, and that brings up a very important point. We work with volunteers, but volunteers often are part of a lake association, and a lake association can play a tremendously important role in doing the kinds of things that Wynn was just describing, in providing local recognition for the volunteer effort, for providing local technical support for the volunteer, and that's this whole idea of kind of a nesting boxes, if you will, of a support structure. So I think that I'm glad that you brought up about the lake associations. Yes?
I was wondering what tool for the IPP part of it, what tools
Are needed?
needed, and what are most effective, and then cost, and it sort of goes to the second session, like I'm the president of Branch Lake Association. We're the longest monitoring IPP in the
You
state.
do, and one of the largest.
But it's always a challenge, because you have to have a healthy organization to be able to fund the new scopes and the things, and as
Right.
you get new scopes and ranger shirts, and now we're just coming up with new maps and all GPS coordinated and all that stuff. You need the money to do
Right.
that, but as you do that, the volunteer part of it accentuates and accelerates. So it's this cause effect, you know.
Right.
I'm just curious, like what you see in all your lakes.
In terms of lake associations providing that funding piece, or
Funding and tools, like you've got that cool book out there with the $12 for the species. It'd be nice if we all could afford to have a whole lot of those. We have 29 zones on our lake.
right. So the field guides actually, if you send any of your plant patrollers on Branch Lake that are already certified, should have one of those books. So first version of that book is still very valid. We've made some improvements to the second version. The second version, if you train some new volunteers and they become certified, which on Branch Lake, that's kind of the track that they're on, they get it for free. If they come to a training workshop, we provide it at a discount. So actually the book, the field guide, now, because of the printing costs, is $35. So that is a pretty big expense, but if you buy it at a training, it's $25. So that's another thing that we're trying to, we would love to be able to continue to give them out to everybody, but we don't have the resources on our end either, so we have to try to make it work. But one thing that can be done is to try to find, like Wynn was talking about earlier, this idea of, or maybe it was Jennifer that was talking about teaming businesses up with your lake association to sponsor various costs that are needed to protect your lake. And it's so easy to make the economic pitch that everybody in the community that surrounds Branch Lake benefits economically from that lake, whether they're a restaurant or a marina on the lake. And so they benefit from it. Would they pitch in to help support your team, and maybe you put their name on your t-shirts or whatever. So those kinds of we could do a whole session on fundraising, because I think for nonprofits, that's kind of us included, one of the biggest challenges is to make sure you have the resources, because the people are willing, but the resources are not always there. So good point.
So I guess a question and again a comment. I guess my first comment would be, I think this is all downloadable. So to save some money, we download that, at least the previous guide.
Right, yes.
We tried to download the new one, but we
Yes,
download them.
absolutely.
And you have that on an iPad. It's actually pretty helpful if you've got a bunch of people around on an iPad. But the other, so that just as a comment.
Do you have scopes, for example?
Oh, no, so I'm thinking specifically of the guys on the scopes. But is there any plans to put the guide on like a mobile app, so that you can actually
Oh
carry
God,
it
I
on
knew
your
this
phone?
was gonna come up. We actually, we started a mobile app 3 years ago. And again, it was a situation of resources. We kind of jumped in and didn't realize how much mobile apps, to create a really nice one, would cost. It's been explained to us now that to create a good mobile app with the kind of information we wanted to put on it, you can think of it as buying a new car. So you can buy, or buying a car.
Yeah.
You could buy a real junker, or you could buy a middle of the road, or you can buy a Cadillac. And we kind of, even the middle of the road is the same price as a new middle of the road car. So we didn't really have the resources when we started, and unfortunately, so we're just kind of back at that now that the field guide is out of the way. We have it, I would say, 80% complete. It not only has all the plant information that's already in the field guide, but it has turtles and fish and different kinds of algae and insects and birds, and so it's we call it the main field guide to aquatic phenomena. So stay tuned for that.
Because it's not only,
Now I put it on film.
It's a great tool, but it also, when we talk about engaging younger people,
Yeah.
the expectation is, if you're younger, you probably could be under 50, and the expectation is
It's
you
on
can
an
get
app.
anything, almost anything you want on the phone.
Yeah.
And so, it also helps in that way too.
When we started the app project, we thought, well, would anybody take this out on the water, their phone? And now everybody takes their phone
Well, they're
everywhere they go,
waterproof.
or they're waterproof, or whatever.
One more
Yeah,
question
yeah.
back there.
Not a question. Hi, Roberta.
Hi.
Two possible tools that may be of interest to people. I don't know if you guys have played with iMap Invasives. It's an app on the smartphone. I think
Yeah.
it's mostly terrestrial, but you could use that for invasive species mapping. And then Environmental Systems Research Institute, ESRI is the acronym, gives a available story map or free online hosted mapping service. You can use aerial photos, satellite imagery on it, and for tracking the spread of invasive species in particular, down to a pretty fine scale. It's not as good as you can get for free, so I would encourage you to look into that too.
And they're both
A little bit of a
wonderful for like lakes that are already infested. They're most of the people we're training are on uninfested lakes. So basically, those aren't as useful for the uninfested lakes. But yeah, but they're a great resource for tracking infestations for sure. Thank you
According to
so
our-
much.
According to
Yeah.
our,
Yeah. So thank you.